Hey everyone, Shannon Allen here. Welcome to my Zoom presentation for our Excel report number 2 for our week 7 assignments. I'm going to be speaking with you today over on all of the scenarios that we went over for this assignment. The first one being our medication half-lives. And we can see here the graphs that I created for the half-life of ibuprofen. I chose Toprol because that is a medication I'm on for my blood pressure. It's genetic. Excedrin migraine because those speak to me. I have headaches a lot. And then naproxen sodium. So I found it particularly interesting that we learned there's an infinite amount of time that you can divide a number in half. That's demonstrated on this chart right here using the exponential or EXP formula in Excel. The lowercase e that we see in the formula is how the exponential formula is represented in Excel. It's officially called the Euler's number and is transcendental, constant, or an irrational number. An asymptote, I don't know how to pronounce that, is a line that continually approaches a given curve but does not meet at any finite distance. So it represents a value that's undefined or represented in the graph of the half-life of the ibuprofen over here. It can never cross the x-axis down here. You'll notice here the same trend in the data represented by the charts of the other medications level, such as the Toprol right here. It never crosses the x-axis. But trend line equations can be helpful because they allow you to visually and mathematically identify an increase or decrease at a steady rate. By looking at the equation of a trend line, you can determine the y-intercept. Knowing how to calculate the half-lives of medication is beneficial for many reasons, including knowing how much to give your small child, how long it's going to stay in their system, in their little bodies. It allows prevention for drug interaction. It's important for clinicians to know how to calculate the strength and quantity of a dose that kills infections in the body. So you can see the other two graphs I made here have similar data and similar graph lines. Trend line equation right here. Moving on to identifying false reports. Let's go back up to the top here. This is where we determine if they are telling the truth in these graphs. I tend to agree with the first two reports, but don't completely trust any source without further investigation and secondary reports to help back this data. The FDA, for example, benefits financially from approved products, and countless examples can be given testifying as to how the FDA got it wrong, so to speak, on products they've approved as safe to consume over the years. Aspartame is a glaring example. It literally destroys your body from the inside out. I see several cancer patients at the clinic I work at dealing with the after effects of aspartame. Causation indicates that one event is the result of the occurrence of the other event. Correlation, on the other hand, is a correlation of variables. It does not mean, though, that the change in one variable is the cause of the change in the values of another variable. Correlation is a mutual relationship. Causation, on the other hand, is the result of cause and effect, and that's why it's important not to confuse the two. The reported correlation we see between the U.S. GE crop up here and the increase and deterioration of the U.S. citizens' health is a result of the compelling data that we see outlined here. While correlation is not proof of causation, there is enough data to support at least 22 diseases. 22 diseases of great significance. It's highly unlikely that these are all random coincidence. Here are just a few examples. The difference between the first two reports and the FDA report is that the first two are independent studies. That's what I noticed from reading them. Whereas the FDA report is produced by our federal government, the Department of Health, which claims to be about protecting us. The first two reports recognize and reveal the safety hazards that come with the use of GMOs in our products that we purchase, and at the very least, they would like the products containing them to be labeled for us so that we can make a more informed decision on our purchases. The FDA report, on the other hand, maintains that they are perfectly safe to consume. We can better assess the information given about our food and health because we are our own advocates. You know, we are the ones responsible for what goes into our body or into the bodies of our children. We can better assess the information given. We make these decisions based on our personal lifestyle choices and what we consider to be important or take priority. The individual health issues or concerns because we're personally invested in ourselves and the well-being of our families. And here we can see the data as it began in 1990 is when we started recording this data for the glyphosate exposure, all the way until 2010, marked increase difference from the time that it was introduced into our system. And similar trend lines here. Huge increase. I mean, astounding numbers. The number of children 6 to 21 years with autism served by the IDA. This is after the glyphosate was applied to the corn, the soy. This is measured in tons. Deaths due to intestinal infection. I mean, come on, seriously? That's not enough to wake you up. These are the list of patients that were discharged with peritonitis. Just realized I misspelled that. And then this graph down here records data for patients discharged with rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, we're just seeing a bunch of the same marked increase. And then those with bowel disease. It just continues to climb. Next, we're going to talk about impaired driving. Information that I looked over for this assignment. Right here is the statistic of lives lost. Let me shrink my screen or pull my screen up a little bit. These are a lot more. I had a lot of graphs to do, okay? A lot of charts this assignment. So if we can move over here where I can see it better, I've got number of lives lost in 2018 were 35. And then in 2019, the number of lives lost, 58. That went up 65.7%. This is information gathered from the Transportation Accident Commission's report on the differences in lives lost due to impaired driving in 2018 versus 2019. And again, it rose from 35 in 2018 to 58. I mean, look at that percentage. It's huge. However, it's important to note that the data for the 2019 reading is for only 2 months. So the report will be more accurate when there's an equal 12-month time span to compare, but the numbers are alarming even at that at this point. So we have to ask ourselves if we're learning from our mistakes, or I believe selfishness is a huge problem. It's like becoming an epidemic. And so long as our focus is on doing what pleases ourselves and what feels right in the moment, then I believe we will see a continued increase in fatalities due to impaired driving. The blood alcohol level that we can note from some of these charts and graphs can be measured as little as 15 minutes after your first drink. You can stay with a quote-unquote safe limit by consuming a ½ ounce of alcohol per hour. So that I think that equated to like a 12-ounce beer or a 5-ounce glass of wine or something. I shy away from alcohol myself. I was married to an alcoholic for 13 years, so you really couldn't pay me to drink anything. Back to the point, intoxication begins with the first drink. A multitude of factors influence your BAC level and are unique to each individual. Age, body type, metabolism, fat, muscle content, etc. are all contributing factors that affect each individual in a different way when it comes to alcohol consumption. You'll note the high arched distribution slope on the histogram over here. This is my first one. I had to download the, let me move this out of the way. I had to download the QI macros add-on because my version of Excel is so old. But anyway, the histogram over here, the more alcohol content in the body, the slower the reaction time, and there's an even distribution in standard deviation. The average reaction time being 2.4 seconds, right here. That translates to a lot of time when you're behind the wheel of a vehicle traveling at a high rate of speed. The Venn diagram that we created from the British Columbia study details different substances that were found in the bodies of car accident injuries victims. The medication was the single biggest influence contributing to, it was the single biggest contributing factor. Here we see the probability of having a combination of 4 substances was 2.4% and 59.9% thankfully have no substance in their system. Back up here to our mean distribution and standard deviation and coefficient of variable, we can see the average, like I said, the average reaction time is rounded up to 2.4 seconds. So many statistics and so much data available to prove why there's just so many things you should not drink or put in your body, especially when you're going to get behind the wheel of a vehicle. It's all calculated in terms of level of urbanization here. Those were different variables. Rural roads, small, urban. It was stats by age group. We can see the difference in age groups that are affected. The location statistics geographically, like I said. Then there's some statistics here in the charts and graphs that are based on gender. The female in 2011, we lost 2008, excuse me, we lost 11 females, 24 males. There's been a 3% change so far. Like I said, this is only 2 months out of the year reporting for this data. Then there's the different types of road users, bicyclists, for example, drivers, passengers, pedestrians. So all of this type of variables contribute to the data and the charting reported, but still there are just so many overwhelming statistics for us on this subject. Now to segue into our texting and driving, which is equally as alarming. Let's go over here and see what we got. Here, get out of the way, honey. I'm going to observe and describe distribution of data on texting and driving. These are the different percentages based on age groups from the year 2007 to the year 2016. This is the range for our data that we're using. And there's the pattern, the percentage of deaths reported from texting and driving. Here is the age group from the 16 to 24-year-olds. The average 6.5% of 16 to 24-year-olds. Percentage of injury is up to 9%. Here's the trend line that comes through here. It's kind of stacked right there in the middle. And then for the 25 to 69-year-olds, that information stays tight as well. And then we'll see this 70 to plus, look, they're a little bit more scattered, and we'll go explain why on that in just a minute. The axes labels are labeled relative to the increment measurement. On the 70 plus, it's counting by 0.2 at a time. The standard deviation, which is right over here, is relative to the trend line. So here we have our standard deviation. Here is our cute little bell curve, our bell-shaped curve for each age group category. Aren't they cute? So they are very similar, the curve pattern. And we can see the standard deviation pattern here, and the percentages plus or minus, depending on which side of the chart you're looking at. So the coefficient variation is 18% for this particular age group. The median was 5%. Coefficient variation for the 70 plus is 27%. And look, there's like 0 standard deviation. I'm not really sure if it's just because I did it wrong, but you know, I mean, you can tell right here it's pretty balanced. Doesn't deviate much. So let's change the 70 plus category to match. If you'll notice on the y-axis, the percentage is similar, 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and so on and so forth. Let's just open one of these up so you can see what I'm saying. We're going to format my axis. The minimum is 0, the maximum is 0.1, the major unit is 0.01, and the minor unit is 0.002. This helps keep our information tight together and give a more accurate reading. You'll notice on the 70 plus, the increments are different. So I'm going to go in here and demonstrate for you how to match those up on this age group to meet our criteria. So I've got a 0, a max, we'll change that to 0.1. Major needs to be 0.01. And a minor is going to go to a 0.002. Now, oh, look how that throws that off. See? This is how we know this particular part of the axis is important. Can reset it and put it back right? Ooh, pretty. There it is. Okay. So, it obviously alters the relationships between standard deviations, coefficient of variation, and the distribution of the dots around the trend line. The width of the box and the whisker spots curves and the bell curves all are affected. The median, all of it is affected by just one change. one small minor change. So an outlier that we can demonstrate what I'm saying here, this 0.9%, let's just change that to 0.8% and see how, come over here and see how it changes our information. Not too bad. Let's go back over here. Let's do some crazy number like, I don't know, 10 and see what happens. Nothing? How about if we go up here to 6.3 and change it to, I don't know, 63? See how it screws that up? Now let's jump over here. Ooh, look, everything's just jacked and jaded. So let's undo. Ooh, pretty. So that's a demonstration of the outlier. Standard deviation, coefficient of variation, and the spread of data on the chart all drastically change if you set that number, if you change it. Sometimes just a little bit. Here I did it a lot just for demonstration purposes. Standard deviation, let's see, the following link, I followed the link as per instructions. There were several contributing factors to what has steadily become an epidemic of texting and driving. Despite all the laws that are passed and warnings, issues, and fatalities that have occurred, it falls into distracted driving category. And I will say that we receive mixed and hypocritical messages because when things like backup cameras and GPS-mounted driver assist programs are pushed on us, it sends mixed messages. The data that I've created here and the corresponding charts you'll see outline the relative number of fatal car crashes by age group. Next part of our assignment, if you'll come along with me, is the distribution of wealth in America. The distribution of wealth in the U.S. is presented here in two groups, the wealthy and the owners of all U.S. wealth, and then there are split into the groups or classes. The top 1% up here, if you'll notice, back it up, Buttercup, makes up 35% of our nation's wealth. Again, this was a cool feature I got to use with this new add-on, this Q1 Macros add-on. The average household income is not normally distributed and cannot have a standard measure of differences between incomes because there are countless contributing factors involved. For example, the normal distribution for the blue-collar worker would greatly differ from the lower income level workers. It's important to note that you're unable to use standard deviation when distribution is not available. Using generalized information for data naturally skews the results. The outliers would be vast. The median, the standard deviation, all of those would vary depending on the different standard income factors that are associated with each group or class. Here we can see that our federal income dollars, where they go, international security assistance, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the CHIP program, safety net, interest on debt, of course, we have lots of that in America. Benefits for federal retirees. Can I just back up for 2 seconds? Look, we have so much debt because we have, as a society as a whole, have trained people to spend more money than they make. If you would spend less money than you make, you'd be in a whole lot better situation, both as an individual and as a country. Moving on. Benefits for federal retirees, transportation, infrastructure, education, science, and medical research. Non-security internationals, all of these others fit into this last 3%. That's a look at where our federal dollars go. Then down here are local tax dollars for our state and our city. I chose the city of Little Rock because it's our capital city and the population is large enough to have a good amount of data here. But our state as a whole, our tax dollars go for 15% for higher education, or excuse me, 15% for K-12, 15% for higher ed. Public assistance is 2%, Medicaid, corrections, like the Department of Corrections, transportation, and then there's, of course, the other category for miscellaneous. And then down here, this bottom section I included on my pie chart is the Little Rock, where your local funds go for each city that you live in. So here, 86% or 0.86% goes to children's, I should have put hospital, children's hospital. So that was encouraging. I mean, yeah, it's a great hospital. Nothing but good about that place. Fire and police get 3% of our tax dollars, or the tax revenue that we pay into the state and city. Roads get 4.1, library, county services, city. Then, just think about it. If we didn't have our current tax system, we would most definitely be free to choose on a more individual level which areas we want our money to support, rather than having the government decide for us. I'm not opposed to taxes per se. I mean, they're obviously necessary, but I think that when giving people a chance to choose where they want to allot their money for what causes they're passionate about, or what institutions or projects mean the most to them, I think that as a whole, people tend to be more generous and give more. It's just like you could equate it to paying a tip to your server, your waitress or your server. I'm obviously for tipping, don't get me wrong, but I am personally, and I believe a lot of other people are as well, more inclined to tip bigger when there's not the forced gratuity. Just puts a sour taste in my mouth for some reason. So the last portion of our assignment is taxes. I mean, everybody loves to hate taxes, right? We gotta have them. We all have them. We don't really have a say in the matter. We looked at the taxes, the ratio of taxes paid on income for someone who is head of household, someone who is single, filing single on their taxes, or married filing jointly. We looked at this from a generic $50,000 annual income. We just used that all across the board to make our calculations. And we did notice that there is a 19% deduction taken for those who file as head of household. There's a 29% deduction for those who file single. So it's actually, you get penalized for being single. Thanks for bringing it up again. Married filing jointly is also a 19% tax deduction. It's human nature to want to earn more money. Sometimes, however, wage increases will throw you into a higher tax bracket. The percentage of that tax bracket is potentially too large. That means that more of your earned income is taxable. Although the gross amount is larger, the net amount can end up being less at the end of the year. If the raise is substantial enough, or comes with other incentives such as more flex time or vacation pay, or it may be worth considering. Otherwise, declining the raise might be the better option, at least for the time being. There are many instances when you don't have a choice in how you file. For instance, married taxpayers are not eligible to claim head of household. You're considered unmarried if filing single, with a couple of exceptions. The standard deduction for a single filer is $12,000. Married filing jointly can potentially save time and money. Additionally, there are different limits for tax brackets, deductions, credits with each option. The ratio of taxed paid to income earned should be carefully considered and evaluated when deciding things like marriage, choice of career, how many children to have, etc. I'm in favor of more levelized tax. I do not think the wealthy should be penalized for making or having more money. The wealthy are often the ones responsible for growing our industries, for providing the jobs for those of us who don't have as much money. They provide a larger contribution to our society as a whole around us. And I can say this confidently as a person who does not possess wealth, by the world standards anyway. I think we should have more freedom to choose where our money goes, and that's like I said in the last segment. We should have more freedom to choose what programs we want to support, and maybe not have quite so much legislated for us, because, you know, there's plenty of examples throughout history that prove that those people that we place as representatives to speak on our behalf, once they get to Washington, don't exactly have our best interest at heart. And I did want to show this graph here. This was not part of the assignment, but quantitative lit is, I'm a fan, okay? Quantitative lit is so much more applicable for real life. I had a science experiment from a biology assignment due last night, and I had to create a graph. I didn't have to, it was optional, but I had to create a graph to show the diffusion of red and blue dye in corn syrup and track the distance of the dye, how fast or how quickly it diffused in 10-second increments. And I did learn that the blue dye was thicker weight ratio, so it actually spread less quickly than the red dye. And so anyway, I just wanted to add that I now know how to do this because of this class. So thank you. I hope y'all enjoyed this presentation, and I will see you on the flip side.